What's going on, friends? As many of you may know and hopefully haven't discovered the hard way, Harley-Davidson is actually discontinuing a lot of critical parts for your older Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And what I mean by critical parts, I mean electronics, things that a lot of times that the aftermarket really hasn't got us covered on very well. A lot of proprietary Harley-Davidson parts that are very hard to come by unless you find them used. Now, I do have a solution for this, and it is a bit unconventional, so stick with me, bear with me, and hear me out on this. Now, what I mean by unconventional way of obtaining these parts, it is actually cheaper in the long run, even though it is a pain in the butt and it is a little scary up front. But to me, the benefits really outweigh the cost when it comes to doing this. Now, many of you guys may have heard insurance auctions, Copart, going and bidding on a wrecked Harley-Davidson motorcycle and actually going and picking it up. Now, some guys will choose to try to rebuild these bikes, or they will strip them down, sell all the parts, or they will try to rob parts off of them to put together another motorcycle. Now, going and buying a Harley-Davidson out of an insurance auction, yes, it's risky. Yes, it's a little spooky, especially when you see these bikes, they're in pretty bad shape. But hear me out here. If you can pick up one of these bikes for absolute crumbs, and the trick is to not pay too much for it. Now, that all comes down to what you plan on doing with the bike. If you're just interested in certain parts off the motorcycle, you're in business right there. But if you're interested in rebuilding it, you're probably going to end up trying to spend a lot more money than you should to get one that's in not as rough a shape. But the best thing about an insurance bike is that somebody else's absolute nightmare scenario disaster can end up being a huge win for you. And I'm going to tell you why. Guys, please don't forget, if you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Now, as many of you may have found, if you've gone out on eBay, to Swap Meets, to some of these other little independent shops that sell used parts, the one thing that you run into is a lot of people think everything they're trying to sell is absolute gold. You might be looking at $500 for somebody else's used electronic part, engine part, whatever it may be, just because the simple fact that, well, you may not be able to get them anymore because Harley-Davidson discontinued them. Well, this is where the insurance auction comes in. Why pay $400, $500, $600 for a single part or maybe a handful of parts when you could get an entire crashed motorcycle for maybe $1,000, maybe $2,000? Just depends on what the bid goes to, on what it is, and what kind of condition that it's in. That is a huge win for you. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, why would I pay $1,000, $1,500 for something when I just need one thing? But are you willing to pay $500, $600 for that one thing when you could spend another grand and get an entire motorcycle chock full of useful parts that you can use? Now, granted, I understand this is not for everybody. You have to have a place to store the bike, you have to have a way to haul the bike, and granted, you have to have time to tear down the motorcycle, inventory the parts, box them up, bin them up, and also have some room in your shop to actually store them and hang on to them. But the thing is that this will pay you back in the long run. Yes, I know it's a pain in the butt. Yes, I know it's a lot of work, but it will save you money. And also it's really nice too, that if you need a part, it's right there. Or if you have a suspected issue with an electronic item on your motorcycle, it's really nice to go over and be able to grab a different one, put it on your bike, and test your theory and see if you were right about it. Trust me, I've made plenty of educated guesses when it comes to electronic parts where you've tested them up and down, one side and the other, everything looks good, but you swap it out with another one and it still ended up being the problem. Now, honestly, I've been on the ladder of that too and made an educated guess and been wrong as well. Unfortunately, the way I did that was I ordered a new part, spent a bunch of money, and it didn't end up being the actual issue itself. But if I had had a used part to test my theory against, I wouldn't have been out a bunch of money on an electronic part that I couldn't send back. Now, of course, I know you all have done it. We've gone out on eBay and you see a plethora of used engines pulled out of crashed motorcycles and transmissions. They want a pretty penny for these things, anywhere from $1,000 to maybe upwards of $5,000, depending on what engine it is. Now, you can get the entire motorcycle for absolute crumbs, get the engine out of it, and also you might even get really, really lucky. And when you actually go and get the motorcycle and you look at it, it may have an aftermarket big bore kit on it. Guy put it on there, put a couple thousand miles on it, and ran into the back of a car with it, and the bike ended up at the insurance auction. Might have flipped over a few times. It may be all banged up and tore up, but who cares? That engine's what you're after. The electronic parts, everything under the skin on that motorcycle is still intact, and I bet you it's still in good shape. And another thing you might run into is you might find one that actually has like a power vision on it. So they left it on the bike. Well, and now I know what you're thinking there. You're like, well, those married to the ECM. Well, if you're buying it for pretty much the exact same motorcycle, just swap the ECM out and you got a tuner with it too. There are a lot of ways to win when it comes to buying a crashed insurance auction Harley-Davidson just for parts. Now, on the latter of that, if you are wanting to rebuild one, that can be a very big win-lose situation. And in my opinion, buying one to rebuild, there's a lot more chance for a loss there than there is if you're just buying the bike for parts. Because you want to get one that's in pretty decent shape, which they tend to go for more than you're probably willing to pay for it. And honestly, by the time you go through and make that bike look absolutely perfect, you're going to have a lot more into it than you'd really want to be into it for. That's just my opinion, and personally, my experience with rebuilding some of those bikes, even though the frame's been repaired, straightened, you've gone through, you've done everything right, the motorcycle still just may not feel right to you. So that's where I say that's a bigger risk than buying one just for parts. But as I mentioned, you guys have probably been out on eBay, seen what all these used parts are going for, these used engines, transmissions, all these things that came out of crashed motorcycles. I'm pretty sure you have a good idea what they're selling all this stuff for. It's not exactly super expensive, but it's not dirt cheap either. But guess where all these parts probably came from? They guarantee you they probably went down to an insurance auction, stripped the motorcycle down, and now they're selling them out, parting them out, and that's where the money's at if you want to make money on it. Now, the thing is, if you want to get one of these bikes to rebuild your existing motorcycle or just have spare parts, this is an excellent way to do it, especially on twin cams, Evolution engines, where these electronic parts are basically getting discontinued by Harley-Davidson. They're totally unavailable, and there's not really aftermarket companies out there picking these up. A lot of your turn signal controllers, ignition modules, all kinds of things like this. There are proprietary Harley-Davidson parts that, as I mentioned, nobody on the aftermarket's doing it. The only way to do it is to get used parts. So do you want to spend a couple $300 on one piece when you could spend $1,000, $1,500, maybe $2,000 and get an entire motorcycle, tear it down, and have a complete plethora of spare parts for the rest of your life? That's up to you, and that's a decision you got to make. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of pluses, but there are some minuses to this as well. Now, if you are experienced at working on your own machine and you're used to hauling motorcycles and dealing with things like this is not going to be a big deal for you. This is an easy breeze to strip down a motorcycle and store your parts. But I also say if you're new to doing this and you're wanting to get into working on your own bike, this is a great way to get started. Yes, it is an investment. It's an investment in your education and building your skills, because you could go out, buy one of these bikes at the insurance auction, haul it home, and just start tinkering with it, tearing it apart, taking it down to the bare frame, stripping all the parts off of it. You're not going to hurt anything on this unless you just get really ignorant and start breaking fins off cylinders, popping pins out, breaking connectors. That's about the only way you're going to hurt it. Otherwise, it's no harm, no foul. The bike's already pretty much trashed anyhow. And of course, you guys all know the benefit of having a bike like this. Anything you don't want or need, you can take it and you can sell it. You can put it on the internet. You can take it to swap meets. You can sell it on Facebook Marketplace, whatever you want to do. So when it comes to insurance auction bikes, if you're buying them just for parts, I feel like the pros outweigh the cons. But guys, I want your opinion on that. Are you guys a fan of buying an insurance auction bike that's already crashed, stripping it down and sitting on those parts, or selling them? Or would you prefer to just go out and buy what you need when and if you need it? But I will say this, it's always handy to have those parts on the shelf to test a theory or get back on the road. But anyhow, guys, that's all I've got for you this week. If you guys enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. Until next week, guys, you stay safe on the streets, ride smart, dodge those cars, and I'll catch you guys back here next week with a brand new video. Thanks for watching.